Hi everyone, welcome. To those of you just joining, we've just opened the door. It's 1 o'clock. I'm Mark Walker from AbilityNet. I'm going to be hosting today's session. A couple of housekeeping points for those just joining. If you do need captions, then you should find a show captions option in your control panel within Zoom. And when you do that, you'll get live captions. So then automated, there's a human in there somewhere, somebody courtesy of my clear text. The slides are available for you at the address of the, I'm going to put it into the thing. The slides are available at abilitynet.org.uk/capability-webinar. If you find the slides useful, then you can download them from there today. You can also see captions which are streamed, which won't, therefore not within Zoom. You have to go to another web page and see streamtext.net/player?event equals AbilityNet. That will give you captions, which are separate. And mentioning already, but at the end, we're going to be asking you what you thought of what we did, any ideas or suggestions for how to improve or content or ideas for further events. So it's just a little bit of housekeeping. Actually, at this point, you normally would say there isn't a fire drill planned. There might be for Zoe and Charlie and Heather, I guess. I don't know. I hope not. And we don't need to point out where the toilets are. So we'll give it a couple of minutes for everybody to join. The first thing to tell anybody joining is that we've got the chat disabled for accessibility reasons. It tends to automatically announce to anybody using a screen reader. So there is a Q&A button you can see on the control panel. That's where we'll be asking you to ask any questions. And certainly now, if you have any concerns or questions about accessing the webinar itself, then use the Q&A to tell us that you can't see something, or you want to be able to click on something and it doesn't work, or whatever it is. The questions and answers will also be the place where you can let us know, as we're going along, what you think of what we're doing and any questions you have for anybody on the panel. So we're up to, how many have we got here? Just getting up to 100. Okay, I'll give another couple of moments. For anybody who is already on board, could somebody ask me a question to prove that the questions and answers are working? You can ask me anything you like. I may or may not be able to answer it, but you should be able to find the Q&A button and ask a question. Hello, I'm Natalie. Hello, how are you? I'm very well, thank you. I'm very well, Kasuni. Hi, Sally. Red sauce or brown? Brown every time. Thank you, Claire. Herman, I've had a banana. In fact, I've had half a banana for lunch. My weather is dismal, but not raining. Any others? Anybody else? Hey, Naya. Yes, it will be recorded. Keith, I'm really not sure what your question means. Is that meant to be a yes/no question? You can only see questions, Natalie, that's right. We can see the questions for everybody coming in. And when we answer them, you can see the answered questions as well. How am I feeling right now? I'm very happy to be here and looking forward to a great webinar. I've gone now. This needs a whole desert island discs of its own. Lacey, on a scale of 1 to 5, how excited are you for today's topic? I'm 7, possibly pushing towards an 8. Great. So we've nudged over the 100, so we're going to get going. It's 1:05. Could we have the next slide, please? So welcome to a webinar. We do these every month. AbilityNet is a charity, for those of you that don't know us. We have a range of different services for disabled people. We have a network of over 400 volunteers that go into people's homes and provide all sorts of support for disabled people in terms of use of technology, principally phones, tablets, laptops, desktops, that sort of thing, fixing people's Wi-Fi when it doesn't work, sorting out security questions, making sure they're doing things safely. But this part of our work is much more focused on accessibility, helping people build and manage accessible websites, apps, and other digital services, particularly sort of larger organizations. We provide testing to check against WCAG guidelines, the international guidelines for accessibility. We do user research and testing. We have a panel of disabled people who can help you with your research. We do lots of different training courses. We can provide accreditation and certification, and we do lots of consultancy and strategy, which is where we are today, really thinking about strategy. I think that what this session has grown out of is a conversation about people who are leading accessibility strategies in particular, and sort of key advocates for accessibility in an organization. We're often trying to work out the big picture about where they're going to go to next. What's the plan over the next 2 or 3 years? We're definitely going to be discussing some of that stuff. And then within that, some of the choices that you have are about either growing your own capability and resources in-house, or using external suppliers and providers of particular services, whether that's training, testing, whatever it is. For anybody, in the journey or working on a roadmap for accessibility, you'll be thinking about the big picture, which is the strategy, but there'll also be these individual steps as you're stepping forward. When's a good time to appoint a team and create your own internal team of accessibility testers against actually, using an external provider for that on an ongoing basis? How much training do you want to deliver yourselves in-house? How much do you want to buy in that training? And so on. So the question today is really around strategy from your point of view as sort of attendees. What is the strategy you're working on? Where do these choices pop up in your next steps? And how do we sort of evaluate those? So I've got 3 panelists live here with me, and we'll meet a 4th who's been pre-recorded in a moment. But Heather, Zoe, and Charlie, thank you very much for joining us. You've all got roles, and we know well the work that you're doing. We'll come back to that a little bit later on within the session. But what we're going to do first is find out who's here. So we're going to run a poll. The poll should pop up for you as an attendee. How would you describe your role in the organization? And we've kept it really simple. We think that you're likely to be involved directly in accessibility. This is the type of event and webinar which is really for people who are tuned into accessibility. There may be people here that this is the first time they've ever heard that word, but I think it's not likely to be. So if you're a leader, you're the person within the organization really pushing hardest to get accessibility sorted. If you're a champion, it may be part of your role, but it may not be the significant part of your role. And you may have some other role in relation to the organization where you're connecting into your accessibility activity, in which case, that's another possible answer. And let us know in the Q&A if there's something in particular that your role includes, so that we can think about that. So we've got a disability advisor, a marketing manager, a training and development manager. Those are some of the answers that are popping up already. I can't see how many votes we've had, but Emma, if you think we're close to having the poll filled in, could we see what the results are? Great. So we've got well, a quarter of you are don't describe yourself either as an accessibility leader or accessibility champion, but the leaders are 30%, champions are 43%. There's a question here. Somebody says, aren't we always missing the people who should attend because they can actually make a difference in the organization? I think that's a really good point. What we say generally is we're in the accessibility choir. We're preaching to the choir. We already believe, we're already the evangelists. That is who tends to turn up. And as you say, Herman, there could be a lot of other people who could benefit from that. I think today's conversation is about how you draw in those other players within the organization. You need a strategy which builds internal buy-in and connections in with other stakeholders. This is a conversation principally amongst people for whom accessibility is already a goal. So, you know, that's how we're going to treat it largely. Of course, there are lots of other interests in the room when you look at the different job titles and others. Could we do the second poll, please? So does your organization have an accessibility strategy? That strategy could take any shape or form that you like, but if it's not described as a strategy, then it isn't one. I guess that's the strict line in the sand. You might have some vague plans, you might have a couple of things you're trying to do, you might have a wish list, but a strategy actually says, this is where we are now, this is where we want to get to, and this is how we think we're going to get there. So if you don't have one of those just yet, this is a good opportunity, and we'll be talking today about how some of the sort of next steps may include building a strategy. But if you do have a strategy, then we'll be talking about how you continue to improve and deliver that strategy, and you know what's in it and how you're growing it. I'm just going to read a couple more of the examples of people who are here. Test analyst, accessibility facilitator, looking towards being a champion, educational development consultant, advocate, accessibility advocate, diversity and inclusion officer. They're in a network team, so they don't have a specific role accessibility, but do have something to do with it. Digital officer. So in the right gang, in the right place, maybe not fully engaged with accessibility in the way that some people are. Hopefully we're nearly there on the results of this one, Emma. There we go. So 35% of you say you have a strategy, 52% say you don't, 13% don't know, and it could be because you're not necessarily the lead or the directly involved in the accessibility that might make it harder to answer. I guess it's not a surprise that of the people who are quite sure, then half of you don't have one. I think what we're seeing over time with AbilityNet and the networking that we do with our various activities is a strategy is the thing that people are just beginning to work on in a lot of cases. I know Heather, because we've done some work with Heather for a number of years, is, you know, does have a strategy, and that's built on working on the maturity model and so on. So some organizations have got certain distance and will be confident in saying, we have a strategy, we understand who's leading it, we understand what it's all about. But for AbilityNet, the vast majority of people generally don't have a strategy. They want one, they're trying to get to one, they might have the beginnings of one, but this plays onto that. So half of the people here are saying you don't have a strategy. Obviously, what we're suggesting is that will be a great next step, to have a strategy, to have some kind of plan that you know you've got some buy-in for. Thank you very much for that. So we're going to have two parts to this. There's a conversation we're going to share with you now. I had with Matthew Lucan of Deque. They're a US-based testing company who we've been working with on a couple of different things. And Matthew is a strategist in the sense of his role in providing support to clients. And in particular, he's got a lot of experience within US Bank in the States, thinking about these decisions about when's a good time to bring somebody in from the outside, and when do you want to build the capability within your team? What's the crossover between those decisions? When's a good time to do one thing and good time to play another? So if we could play that video, I think it's about 10 minutes, and then we'll be back live to join the panelists and discuss what we've seen. Please do use the Q&A if there's anything that you're not clear about as we go through the presentation.
Hi, everybody. I'm Matthew Lucan. I work for Deque Systems, where I am a vice president and strategic consultant. So I work with companies of all sizes around the globe to scale their programs efficiently and at speed. Was ending my bank career and looking for another opportunity. I had been a Deque customer, and they got word that I was looking and said, hey, can you come help us help companies scale? So this was around the George Floyd moment in the US history. And so I was looking for a way to affect things at a much larger scale than just the bank's customers. And working with Deque, we now, have customers all around the world. So we're affecting things at a much, much higher rate, because we help those companies help their customers, right? So we're talking about millions of people affected with one program.
Yeah.
So it's a fun activity working with all different companies of different sizes, different program maturities, different levels, different cultural problems, different organizational issues, funding, adoption, you name it, and helping them really pinpoint the problem that they have, like trying to decide whether you do it in-house or you go external or you do both. And what are the things that you consider, and what are the things that you want to think about, and how might you want to measure it, so you can just see how you're doing, whether it's success, whether you need to pivot, or whether you need to change. Because that, regardless of where you are in your program, meaning your maturity, whether you're just starting, whether you're 10 years in, it applies the same way. Whether you're a person that's running the program, whether you're a champion, whether you're actually an advocate sitting outside, maybe you're that leader, or maybe you're their HR person, regardless of who's in the audience that we're talking to, it starts with defining the problem and defining the outcome that you want. So working together to say, okay, we're trying to decide if we want to outsource it or staff it internally. What might that look like? Part of that is how quickly, what is the velocity? When do you need to look like X by? That kind of leads you to some general conclusions. So for example, if you're trying to do something very, very rapidly and you don't have the staff to do it today, and leadership says, yeah, we're willing to support you to get that talent. Okay, that's great. You've got some resources now. You've got some funding. You're going to work with HR to hire those people. That's great. But how long does that take? You've got to get the funding into the system. You got to get the jobs posted. You have to get the recruiters on. You got to interview, wait for garden leave, get them on board, train them, get them proficient, and now you can start working. That might be 2 weeks for you. That might be 9 months, right? But it's a really, really long time. So if we start from just that first piece and say, okay, we're trying to achieve this within 12 months, and it's going to take us 9 months to get our own people on, that only gives us like 3 months of a ramp. Consider getting outside resources. Maybe you get staffing augmentation through a recruitment firm. Maybe you work with a consultant. What can your budget afford? How quickly can you bring them on board? Another one might be, what is the vendor relationship in procurement? So for example, you might have AbilityNet or Deque already in your vendor system. So getting a consultant from them would be relatively quickly, because you already have all that paperwork and MSAs and redlined with lawyers and all that stuff all taken care of. You could do it quickly. Or maybe you already work within your HR department where you have a staffing agency for staff augmentation, and they are able to find the talent you need for accessibility. Great, then work through that. So it's a lot of depends, but it comes down to, what are you trying to achieve? Can you get alignment in your organization of what you're trying to accomplish? And then how much time do we have, and how quickly can we get there? If you're doing something short term, look for augmentation. If you're doing something long term, it's always best to invest in something that you're going to have long term, like a permanent FTE or something like that.
And that's great advice, and I think, as you say, I'm hearing the service designer there say, define the problem. That's what that
it's always
like really,
key, and it's always
jump
the
straight
thing.
in.
It's always the thing that people forget, right? You think you're aligned, or it's a simple like, well, let's do blah blah blah, and it's like, okay, we can do blah blah blah, but is that really what we need to do? Let's think about that. Let's pause for just a moment. Are we all on the same page? I think it looks like this. Do you agree? Like, what's the outcome? And hypothetical example, right? You want to train 1,000 developers in digital accessibility. That's a very simple statement, but you start breaking that down and you say, but train them in what? Just fundamentals? Okay, well, that's relatively easily to do. We've got to get a 30-minute training on fundamentals and maybe a little bit of regulation. Great, okay, I could buy that off the shelf. I could create it myself. I could work with my learning and development team to, in the bigger corporate sense, and see if they could do it. But of course, when you really think about that, What that means is you're going to do it, but they're going to code it and put it into their system. Do we want it measured? Do we need to put it into their HR record? On and on and on, right? You start to see that the simple ask of train a bunch of people becomes a much, much more complex thing very, very quickly when you start picking at it. And you might make some decisions like, you know what? For now, we're not going to record it into the HR system that they completed it, but we want to do that later. Okay, do we do things concurrently then? Can we get a course off the shelf, take it, and then somehow record that with the vendor, spreadsheet that out and embed it into the HR system, or maybe have a business analyst code it by hand? Then we can do two things at the same time, get there fast with somebody else, but also record it in the system. That's the type of stuff that you really want to start sitting down and really thinking about it, because now you start to see it affects how many other people need to be involved, which slows things down. How much money are you talking about? How much velocity and speed? How quickly can we get that created and get it into people's hands? But if it's something more complex, like I need to train everybody in fundamentals, so 1,000 people, but 300 developers also need to take some coursewares that will give them remediation skills, right? So they need to know about how to take a defect, a WCAG defect, and repair it. They need to know about color theory. They need to know some basics, right? Well, maybe that's 4 hours of training. You're back to the question of outsource it, build it, etc. But more importantly, there's now a cost here, because you have to take that developer offline for 4 hours and get them to train it. So that means that we've got to pay that salary to do that, which means we're not using that resource for velocity of development. Okay, what can that agile team support? How do we slow their velocity for required training? How long do they have to take it? So you start to see that gets complex, because maybe that needs to be taken over 30 days, or maybe it could be taken over 90 days. Great, now their velocity goes from, hypothetically, say like 10% of their available bandwidth down to just 2% over a 90-day period. And they can take it as quickly or as slowly as they need to. But that opens up a whole bunch of questions: cost, velocity, involvement, speed, how quickly we get it set up, etc. So again, it's easy to start thinking about it. As you define the problem well, you think through all the outcomes that you want, you work with the people to understand what they're bringing to the table or what their embedded costs are. Now, this was one that I found that I never even thought of. Getting your internal learning and development team might be a cross-department charge for your company. And it was like $10,000 for me to pay the learning and development team to make the training, whereas I could buy something off the shelf for half that cost. Like, it was a no-brainer.
Yeah.
So those are the type of things that you would, define the problem, and you start to see the outcome becomes very easy to see.
Yeah, I think I like the examples you're giving there, and I think they remind me as well that when you and I talk about this, and we've done it with roundtables and others, that there's an important word in there, which is the program that you're envisaging. That you're not going to take one action and everything's going to happen. You may need to have parallel projects. You may need to back certain horses at different times.
Right.
There may be times when internal. I was thinking, actually, we get told as well that sometimes it's better for an external person to come in and say what the person's been saying, just to validate the strategy.
In the US,
So
they call that consultor
term
syndrome, where
Yeah,
the employees have been saying it for 3 years, but as soon as a high-priced consultant comes in and says the exact same thing, all of a sudden leadership goes, "Oh my God, I've never heard that before."
Yeah.
You're like, yeah.
So that's one of it could be one of your strands, which you put in at a certain point when you know you're going to hit a particular sort of strategic bump in the road. And meanwhile, you may have more operational stuff that you try and do internally by connecting with other members of the teams and connecting in, via other places.
So you might want to approach leadership to say, look, we're going to build a training program, but we're going to do it in stages. We're going to do this immediate need now using an outside agency, and then we're going to work with L&D concurrently to build something that's more sustainable, more updatable, and more on brand with our culture, and be able to serve these other needs of onboarding and performance improvements and things like that, and the person that needs refresher training every year to keep them excited about doing digital accessibility. or maturing in their role, or giving them an enhancement in their role, which is what we all want from a corporate standpoint, right? In maturing the employee, giving them better and better skills, right? So part B is, what's the bigger long-term goal that you're looking for 3 years out, 5 years out?
I think that, as you say, there's balance to be made here between internal and external resourcing, and that what we need is that clear sort of sense of program and direction and problem solving, which will then be, some things will happen in some way, some will happen in the other. There isn't an instant choice between the two. It's not always binary, and so we really need to think that through and work out in a bit more detail where the right answer is in front of us now.
And you'll hear some great examples from Charlie and Zoe.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. My video back on. It's a bit weird having two of me on the screen. So, Emma, could we have the slides back up as well, please? Or Louise, whoever's doing that. Thank you, Louise. Can we have the next slide? Perfect. So we've got I quick recap on what Matthew's talking about there. I think that just to put it in the context of that problem solving, Matthew's experienced across a number of years in some big organizations. So sometimes when we hear him speak, and he's spoken at a number of things we do, sometimes it can feel like it's out of reach to where we are right now. Often an organization, particularly for those of you who said you don't have a strategy, it's not necessarily a leader role that you have, it can feel like it's a long way away from the reality of your day-to-day work. But I thought the example he gave about training was really interesting, because we will talk about that. You know, we will know that people want to build skills. We need to work out how we're going to get to that. And that's often a first step into sort of getting a groundswell of knowledge within the organization. So that's a really good example. Is it better to grow that from within the organization, or is it better to bring skills and training in from externally? That's the point of the question. And wherever you are in your journey, there's an option to try and win the case internally and build a team, or a case for externally getting a budget and bringing in some expertise. So 3 people who have juggled that very same question are going to just talk us through their take on it. Heather, your picture's on the screen first. Can I ask you to introduce yourself and say what you do?
Yeah, sure. Hey, Mark. I'm Heather Hepburn. I run the accessibility program at Skyscanner, and I'm also one of the co-founders of an external group called the Champions of Accessibility Network, or CAN, along with Gareth Ford-Williams and Charlie, who is also here. So yeah, well, talking about accessibility strategy, I mean, well, 4 years ago, we didn't have one of those. Like, it was non-existent. In fact, my job was non-existent. So I had to build the role first, and then look at, building a strategy around it. And actually just looking back at my strategies, having a think about today, the stuff that I was planning 4 years ago, it's the same stuff. It's the same stuff that's in my strategy now. It's just at a different level. It's built on stronger foundations. So it's a little bit different. Like things like training, exactly what you're talking about. Back when I started, my strategy was to go around as many teams as possible myself and train them. And I think I got to about 45 teams and then thought, well, wait a minute, surely there's a better way. But now it's about more about, okay, well, how do we embed that, more online, self-led access to training that we're paying for? Things like sorting out our champions network. At the beginning, it was getting one up and running. And now it's all about, refining it, leveling it all up, improving it. And even just building into processes. This was funny when I looked back and saw what I was trying to do back then. It was very much build it into all processes. Well, that's impossible. So everything is now a bit more targeted. It's coming a bit more, from an educated viewpoint. So yeah, it's quite nice to see that progression. And I should just say as well that your digital accessibility maturity model has helped us a lot work out what we should be working on, when we should be working on it. But yeah, capability is one of the harder parts of the whole thing. I should also just say it's not just me anymore. I don't know, you've always talked about me as the lone evangelist, but thankfully I now have a bit of a team. So I have a lead accessibility engineer who I could not live without, Gert. We have 90 plus accessibility champions who are amazing. And yeah, I do have budget now. So we do work with external suppliers as well.
Cool. So you're the evidence, you're the proof that it works. Charlie. you tell us about your work at the Ministry of Justice?
So yeah, my name's Charlie Turrell. I'm the Engagement Manager and Champs Lead at the Ministry of Justice, and again, one of the co-founders of CAN with Heather and Gareth. So previously worked at the BBC as the Accessibility Champions Manager there, and at the MOJ I kind of have a similar network engaging staff and management across all different kind of departments, educating them on digital accessibility, collaborating with them, making sure that what we offer as a team works for everyone. Yeah, in both companies, I've worked alongside the team, making sure that our strategy is effective. And mainly for me, using the champions' voices and those are senior leadership to like drive the change and influence the training and consultancy that we offer. So like the MOJ, it's a massive organization. It's probably about, I think it's like 95,000. And as much as we sit in like the digital space, our remit is everyone. So we have people obviously like in legal, in marketing, in comms. We have people that work directly with prisoners. We work pretty much across the entire thing. So when you're looking at developing a strategy, that can be quite difficult to know where to start, because what strategy works for one area might not work for the other. So I think we've kept it fairly simple, which works quite well. So it's constantly evolving, but we want to make sure that as many people as possible have this basic knowledge of digital accessibility, that we're using the right language when we're approaching things, that we're using the right lenses as well, like looking at the difference between the medical model, the social model, like making sure that we're having those conversations, because half the time, you know, you could go into senior leadership and go, yeah, we want to talk about accessibility, we want to push it, and they go, oh yeah, you know, is it this, and this, and you're thinking, no, kind of not actually. Like what we're trying to do is we're looking at the digital accessibility, we're making sure that it works for everybody, we're removing those barriers for people. And so just kind of having that language works really well. So that just helps frame the conversations in how we go about improving services, like what the conversations the champions are having, like how we can get them engaged, how we can actually make them motivated to embed accessibility in their work. And then if we all kind of learn together, and obviously there is different approaches, but if we're getting that basic knowledge right down, it means that that network can evolve. It might go in different directions, people might having different conversations, the knowledge level might change depending on what, you know, how many services that you're developing, what you're actually kind of creating. But as long as that knowledge level is there and then we understand where the gaps are, that helps us direct the training that we need as well, and encouraging everybody to take part. So ours is a little bit more fluid, I think, because it has to be, and I think we have to evolve depending on what people are doing. But essentially, we're finding the right people and making sure that they have got the right kind of knowledge.
Great, thank you. And we'll come back round with some questions to follow that up. Zoe, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not in alphabetical order, but you have got the Z. So
I'm
can you tell us about your role and anything you're developing in terms of strategy?
yes, I'm Zoe Portlock. Hi. I establish and lead digital accessibility at HL, which is also known as Hargreaves Lansdown. It's a financial services company based in Bristol in England. And to give you a bit of a scale of size, like Charlie mentioned, we have about 2,800 colleagues and over 1.8 million clients. So I've been doing that for 5 years, and it feels like it's been my life's work, creating the first of any presence for digital accessibility in the company. That's involved leading strategy, running training, mentoring our ambassadors, running a working group, taking consultations. All of that has led to a dedicated team of myself and Carl, my colleague, and we have over 20 side of desk kind colleagues volunteering their time. So over those 5 years, we have worked with several external suppliers, both for one-off pieces of work, like focus groups when we were changing our brand font to be more accessible, or ongoing relationships like having regular consultation hours. And all of that has fed into our strategy and the cultural change, whether that's the boost in legitimacy of an external audit or running a company-wide lunch and learn. So while I have my remit as digital, I've quite naturally found myself involved in other parts of the company where accessibility comes up. So even with HR and supporting clients, but also supporting our customer service staff in complaints and advice, navigating cases with clients. So a whole range of stuff, but keen to feed into the discussion today and share what I have learned.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. So I'm gonna come back to you first, so just to keep the ball rolling. we're talking particularly about skills. I think, the first thing is you've mentioned a broad range of activity there. So just to set the scene for people, listening in, I think that's quite typical. You've followed your nose, you've been keen, you've really pushed it. The next stage is to begin making that somebody else's job, I think, isn't it? To grow those things out so that you're not the person who's always asked all the questions. And that's often a change in for anybody in that sort of going from the evangelist into the leadership role.
Yeah.
Within that context, what sorts of skills and training have you been thinking about developing? And what are the priorities at the moment so that people listening and get a sense of, I need to get people to learn how to do this. Which particular skills do you focus on? How do you sort of approach that task?
Cool. So I would say often what is most important to establish for me is this coming at accessibility and disability from a really respectful angle. So first of all, we run Disability 101 training, which really gives that basis of what's the medical model, what's the social model, what language do you use, what's etiquette, what about identity and nuance. I always find that to be the foundation that I want us to build upon, depending on the different disciplines. But always found that really important. And we have essentially trained up a lot of people in all kinds of different areas of the business together. That can first be, getting that foundation, but then building upon those core understandings within their discipline, sharing out best practice, and really just knowledge sharing to the people around them. But in terms of external expertise, I've really seen that as a short-term boost in visibility and legitimacy. When you're building that capacity in-house, it can take years and years to make sure that all of the different areas of accessibility programs are catered for internally. Like Matthew was saying at the beginning, you can't hold off and wait for that to happen. You need to be building a business case in order to get those goals reached. And I found that external suppliers have really helped build that presence and interest in the business to be able to get to the point where you've got budget to do professional training rather than internal knowledge sharing.
Cool. Charlie, in just picking up the baton a bit there, and you've got this huge network of people that you want to learn, all sorts of different skills in different places. How much are you able to do that internally? You were sort of building a model almost where you were going to set them up and then they were going to start self-supporting. I mean, is that your vision in terms of the next stage of developing skills? And will you continue to use external for any particular services that you can think of, or is there learning that's always better to come from outside? How does that match up as you start to hit scale that you're talking about there?
I think it's a bit of a mix, in all honesty. I think right at the very beginning, it was that kind of basic knowledge. Let's make sure that we're all on the same page. And like Zoe was saying, like that language is really important, because some of the barriers that people experience into getting into the accessibility world is, oh, I don't want to offend. I know maybe I'm not doing it in the right way. Like, I feel like I don't have that knowledge. Like, everybody else knows more than me. I go straight in like, you probably know more than I do. I'm just trying to get you all together. I'm just trying to steal all your knowledge. We're doing that as a group. We're making sure that we're learning together. And then once that starts and people feel a bit more comfortable, because you've got to remember that building that network isn't just about building the capability. It's also about making sure that everybody can have those conversations together. So, we want people to start answering each other's questions. I don't want my team or me to always be going on Slack or Teams or whatever kind of platform and always being the one that answers. I wait and see if somebody else comes in and then they go, oh yeah, I tried this last week, or there was something that I did and this form is really similar to yours. That's the energy that you want from that network. And then as that starts to develop, you're thinking, oh, everybody's asking the same question here, or the one-to-ones I'm having with champions, we're all having conversation about alt text, and that seems to be a bit of a thing where people aren't quite grasping it. And so we either can do something internally that's within our capability as a team. Also, as a team, we're very, very busy. So sometimes it isn't always possible from a resource point of view. And then I think, okay, so where do I fill the gap? So I know that we've used AbilityNet in the past for assistive technology, and we did an incredible panel with someone that was using eye gaze, with lots of different kind of assistive technologies. And that was fascinating. We wouldn't have been able to do that internally. And I've used that recording over and over and referenced referenced that, and champions have referenced that and gone, oh, I remember we used eye gaze and there was a switch user here, and that kind of conversation happens. And you know, even now we've got a series of events from now until the end of June. Half of them are internal, like low literacy, because it's quite specific to prisons, etc. We've got something around alt text, we've got something around how to design for older adults. But then we also have a couple of external speakers that are coming in that are talking about inclusive design, that are talking about assistive technologies, you know, and that mixture, I think, also helps with engagement. You don't always want to be seeing sometimes the same faces or hearing the same voices. You know, you want some kind of refreshing thing. It might not even be something where we go, I agree with it, but actually having that and then creating a discussion where we think, oh, yes, I take that element of it, but maybe that isn't as relevant to us, but it's a great thought, I can utilize it elsewhere. That mix, I think, keeps that accessibility knowledge fresh. It keeps the conversations fresh. And it's something that then people still enjoy doing, rather than it being kind of constantly fixing problems all the time as well.
I really like that. I mean, I think that what I'm hearing as well is when we're talking about capability and skills, thinking about the learner in your sense, there are multiple different things that people are trying to learn. There are multiple different roles that they're in. And then I like that thing about keeping it fresh, keeping them engaged is also important, because that's part of the momentum you're trying to build. How does that look in Skyscanner, Heather, in terms of the program of training that you've developed over that time that you've described? How has it shifted in terms of the content you have in it?
Yeah, I mean, we do have, so we have the fundamentals kind of training that when you're becoming a champion, I ask everyone to do that. And it is just me talking to a camera for 45 minutes, but it's just that good grounding. It's what the girls are saying, it's the language, it's the social model, it's, you know, it's the foundational stuff that they really need to know. After doing going around all of the different teams, that was actually pretty successful, because I think when you're more one-on-one with people, it does have more of an effect. And I will say that even though we have invested in online training that is available to all of our champions and then anyone who's particularly interested as well, we are actually shifting a little bit now back to that one-to-one side of things. So from a developer's perspective, Gert's doing a brilliant job of working with specific teams, even specific people within specific teams, to actually teach them one-on-one on how to test with a screen reader, test for magnification, you know, test keyboard only. He's actually putting in the effort to do that, and then hoping that person will then train out within their team. Same with designers. We've only recently just set up this, and it's actually been really, really good so far. Just drop-in sessions, once a week, drop-in sessions. The product designers come along. Most of it is around the accessibility annotations that we're asking them to do on their designs now. It's normally questions around that, but it's brilliant. Have these fantastic conversations with them about exactly what they're doing. And I think, see, when they're learning as they're doing, that seems to be really, really effective. They just get it. And it means the next time they can answer their own question, and then maybe come with a fresh question. So yeah, that has been really, really good. I mean, we're still at the kind of get broader, here's some guidelines and let's do a bit of a session, a webinar session. We're still at that stage for people like our freelancers, content writers, our translators. You know, we're doing sessions with them on a broader scale. So it's just finding the right solution, I think, for the particular audience at the particular stage that you're at.
Mm. So I'm getting, again, that sense of the variety of things that you're trying. I mean, I guess at the beginning you think, oh, I'm going to do this. And like you said, I'm going to go around and talk to everybody. And then you go, oh, hang on a minute, I'm going to have to grow it because that's not scalable. And also the conversations have changed. So what are the pros and cons in terms of that mix of you being the face of it? Charlie, you mentioned it as well, that, you know, it's not just one person who's going to answer every question. You're not the person who's going to be there in every meeting. I guess that the pros and the cons play into how people engage with that learning, and then also trying to embed it within the organization in some way so that you can track their progress. I mean, what sort of pros and cons do you see around that?
For me, it's good to have visibility. I think it's great when you're seeing all these questions being asked and you're thinking, okay, yeah, there's knowledge gaps here, there, and other, and they are answering questions, and it's great. I think it's an odd one, because I think you want people to continue to grow and learn in their own way as well, and you want people to kind of go off and do that. But I think sometimes the difficulty is making sure that you're all learning the right kind of thing as well. And everybody has got so many different skills, so many different reasons for doing something, and you've got to make sure that they're not going off and also creating their own training and going and doing various different things. So kind of pulling it back constantly, I think is really important.
Yeah. And Zoe, there's a question here that about pros and cons. Should training be compulsory or voluntary?
Well,
tell us a bit about your answer to that, but also the pros and cons, because presumably you're going into a new phase in terms of it being, some elements of it being compulsory. What are the pros and cons in terms of how you're approaching it at the moment?
so what Mark is hinting at there is that every HL employee has to complete an accessibility course that we have created. It is an e-learning module and sets to give them the background of the business case, practical skills, how to use the brand in an accessible way, and just really putting that at a level with all the regulatory training that you have to do in financial services around data protection and all of those really important things. And when you're designing training for the entire organization, your audience is different, the way you approach it is different. You're aware that anyone answering that could be of a completely different background. So you very much have those more generalized courses that don't go too technical. You don't want to alienate anyone if they are never someone who have seen code. But at the same time, you need to keep them engaged enough that they can dig into what it means for them. So yeah, I mean, it's fantastic for raising the profile of how important that issue is in your business. If it is right up there with something you have to complete in order to work there, it really does something for the status and the culture. But, you know, e-learning isn't always the best received thing. No, nobody looks forward to doing their e-learning. So you have to balance that too, and just make it as applicable as possible. And also, e-learning it's removed from a person. Heather was talking about going out to teams directly and standing in front of them and being like, I really care about this and I need you to see that and get on board with me. And it's that scalability question. I used to do the same, and it became a point where you're like, this is not sustainable. This cannot happen forever. And that really wide scale training we completed was a way to get that message out there without touring around all of these different departments and products. So challenges with it, but overall has been really good for the cultural shift, which I think we'd all agree is a really important part of any accessibility program. You can put all these things in place, but if people don't genuinely believe in it and back it, that's not going to last. You might move on from the company and that impact will be lost. Like, the culture is hugely important.
So and more generally about pros and cons, it sounds like there may be a scalability thing which is the advantage of bringing something in from outside. And and the first step is build it so that you know what it is yourself potentially, but then you need to scale it, and that's where you might need the external input or the resourcing and the e-learning and the other things that go into it. Are there other pros and cons that you've encountered in terms of those decisions?
Yeah, I think you also need to think about how when you are doing more specific training that isn't that generalized introduction, each discipline are motivated by different things. If you're talking to product managers, you don't really want to go into the depth of user stories. They want to know how to balance that with their other business priorities. They want to know what do I have to help me make tough decisions. And developers might prefer to be learning on the job. So with the scalability of it, it really is looking at a completely new group and what's going to engage them most, but also just be the most helpful thing to give them. Because it is really disappointing if you spend a lot of money bringing on some training that just does not hit the mark and doesn't have the impact. There's a lot of care that needs to go into that, but at the same time, with scalability, you could spend months developing that yourself. There is this trade-off of how much do I trust this supplier to deliver this, and how can I make sure that the audience that have received that training actually resonated with it and took stuff away from it. Training is a huge part of any accessibility program, and can just look so different role to role.
I'm going to pick up a question here from Dave, who I think you know, Dave Musson. How have you blended external training if you already have some internal training? You're beginning to describe there about sometimes you're going to have a program which includes your stuff and the thing you've brought in. That's what it sounds like it's beginning to build as. That sensitivity you're describing, how do you approach those decisions? What's your thinking in terms of what the success of that program will be?
Yeah, I think it's really working with advocates in different areas, and trying to, a big part of this in terms of scaling up is that you cannot be everywhere at once. You cannot know that space of the business in the extent that you know where you happen to join. Really just making the most of kind of the behind the scenes knowledge of leaders. What have you done in the past that really surprised you and how effective it was? Having those little interviews and getting in on that perspective that you otherwise can't really get without being around those colleagues in that discipline day to day. That's been a really valuable part of any plans I've found.
I've got one question to clarify here. Zoe is saying everyone regardless of job title. Is she including the cleaners, the pot washers, etc.? Is it literally every single person? Because it's the mandatory sort of part of the regulatory stuff, isn't it? So as I understand it, it is every employee, and it is on a cycle that they would have to repeat. Yeah,
it is repeated. So I technically I would say I think the cleaners are more agency employees.
okay.
But otherwise, every person who is in customer service, receptionists, any financial advisors, lawyers, developers, testers, a whole thing is, we've designed it for groups that aren't otherwise going to have that technical training. You can know in your needs of your program that you need to train developers specifically in certain ways. Same for designers, researchers. But that bigger picture, all of the other roles in an organization that don't have that specific accessibility best practice training that's necessary, we needed to engage those people. So everyone else, I believe, yes.
So, and then I've got one last question for you about any practical issues which you've discovered around bringing in external suppliers versus internal. I know that there's been some things that have been issues for you there.
Yes, financial services can be very strict on its suppliers and InfoSec and security and access to things. Audits, we always saw long-term that the plan for product teams would be having regular external audits that they would have to report on and explain what has happened between those two audits, for example. That just being part of the picture of what it means to launch something. But when we came to trial that, we found that actually getting external third parties access to your systems for anything that isn't your public website where you're not logged in was really challenging risk-wise. There was little we could do about it at all. Risk assessments, they were very concerned. We've only been able to do audits on things that are already live, and that is such a small part of the picture. The difference of reading an article about a fund compared to opening an account or looking at your investment information, the scale was so much bigger. So we've had to shift once we've realized that external audits are not going to be possible for a lot of these journeys. And that shift has been to start conversations about bringing someone in-house who has the skills to audit, but also working on frameworks and resources that can help engage and teach testers to know how to audit things themselves. So another thing is very much, does this sit with the accessibility team, or how can we encourage this to be something that people own in themselves? Because that's scalability, after all.
And that, I guess that's accelerated that question rather than you thought that might come to that, but you're having to solve it that way because of the other constraints. So Heather, I'm going to ask you about Champions Networks. Charlie, there's a couple of questions in here about skills and jobs and stuff. So I'll come to you about that in a second, about how you integrate that into the recruitment process and so on. But Heather, you've got a lot of experience in working with Champions Networks. Where do they fit into this jigsaw? Are they an absolutely essential ingredient of getting this capability embedded in the organization?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, I don't know where I would be without the champions that we have. They are amazing. when we onboard champions, we have a little role description of what it means to be a champion. And part of that is committing to learning. So they're already they're already committing to, yes, I will learn some more about this. And another one is sharing their knowledge with their teams. And we really try and get them to do that. So it's just cascading down. And sometimes it's the only way. If you've got champions in teams all across the business, I mean, we're not talking about just product development teams, it's everywhere. We can't be everywhere. We don't have skills in all of these areas either. There's a huge part about someone in the same team doing the same job as someone else, talking to them about accessibility. That's a hugely different thing than me going in and talking to someone about their job and I don't really know much about it. I think that can be so effective. And I think if you have that broad reach as far as you can, across all of the teams, it really does help. I mean, I couldn't live without my champions. I should also have mentioned actually that in terms of fundamentals, we do run our empathy labs at every global induction session we do now. And that is for every new start. So every new employee, they hear me talking about accessibility for half an hour and then they experience our lab. And I think that's been worth its weight in gold as well. And my champions actually manage all of the different stations we have. So I always need like 10 volunteers to run a session like that. So without them for things like that as well, I'd be really struggling. No, they're amazing.
I think thinking about capability, what you're also bringing in there is that knowledge and awareness and more general motivation to be solving problems and addressing this issue and thinking about what the dimensions are, because you can't predict that necessarily. You can't say, here's the 10 things you need to know in a job I don't really understand. That's the combination, is motivating them so that they're continually asking what the problem, how they can address that problem themselves. That's a big part of this capability thing, isn't it?
The number one thing actually in that job description of a champ is to be the voice of our disabled travelers or our disabled colleagues, depending on what part of the business they're in. So that's the main thing. If they are there just saying, wait a minute, have we considered this before? How's someone going to use that like this? Even that is gold. And yeah, very, very hard to get if you don't have a strong network. But yeah, it's a challenge creating such a strong thing as well. It's not easy.
Charlie, if we switch from that, I mean, Heather said job description, but was broadly describing this sort of notional champion role. When we're starting to embed skills and knowledge into job descriptions and recruitment, what does that look like in terms of your experience, and how specific can you get? Should you be trying to be really detailed at that point?
I think I suppose it depends. Like, I know I've seen some of the questions as well, like around bringing in short-term resources, etc. And then obviously those job descriptions are slightly different. But I think that, so for our team specifically, just to give you a bit of context, is we have a couple of people that are permanent staff and then quite a few contractors that have come in with different skills and knowledge, etc. And that's been really helpful for us to build champions networks with, if you're going to improve inclusive design, if document accessibility, development, etc. So having those skills and knowledge and passing them on to champions and other teams has been incredible, because you're getting people that have done this for X amount of time in all these different organizations and know kind of those skills, and then embedding that with champions and kind of the rest of the organization. Those conversations are happening all the time. Like, those skills are valuable. Can we make sure that we speak to HR? Can we make sure we're speaking to senior leadership and spotting those skills and knowing that person is a champion and going to all these different kind of trainings? That is, we're wanting to push that as, this is great for somebody to hire this person because they're doing all this extra kind of knowledge sharing and they're getting really stuck into this. And so that's something that I'm trying to push at the minute, and kind of have those conversations with HR, have those conversations with recruiters, and saying this accessibility knowledge, this very special skill that person has is valuable. You're looking at, I've got champions now, and I actually had a conversation yesterday with a new one, and the one-to-one I thought was just going to be a casual one-to-one. They said, oh, I've saved 15 minutes at the end. I want to do this as a role. I want to get into the accessibility journey as a career. Like, let's have this conversation. I thought, this is new, this is excellent. Like maybe I can use that as something that I'm kind of developing. And so we had a really deep conversation about my career and then how I know other people's careers have happened. And she was saying, oh, I went for an interview, but I don't have the coding knowledge, I don't have the development knowledge. I was like, I don't have the coding knowledge. I was like, I've been doing this with no knowledge really of the technical. I said, luckily I know who to find that can answer that question. I said, but that's that part of the role. She did, she was in D&I and HR, and I was like, that's perfect to doing something like me. So instead, we're adding that element on the learning journey of, if you would like to do this as something that's more embedded in your career, I have got champions even at the BBC that have eventually got that on their job description, and they are the lead and they're the person that people go to for accessibility, and they are recognized as someone that has that skill. So that is something that I'm hoping that maybe if one person's interested in that, and I have had those kind of casual conversations before, can that be an element of their learning journey that then we can flag to senior leadership and go, these people are interested, they're really wanting to get stuck in. Why aren't we kind of showcasing that? Why aren't we going, look how fantastic this is something that they know is equally as important. So, let's make it valuable and let's make it something that everybody wants to be a part of as well.
Well, thank you. So a quick housekeeping moment. The clock is about to strike 2 o'clock. We will stop in a few moments. Got a couple of questions we're going to go through, but just to let anybody know on here, we'll be done fairly soon. And also that any questions that we're not answering will be part of the FAQs that we share back afterwards. Zoe, I don't know whether you can speak to this one about how you know whether suppliers actually know what they're doing. What's your experience of procurement or finding and working with suppliers? You can mention names if you wish to, but clearly there might be more general lessons. You've obviously brought in quite a lot of different input at certain times. How easy or difficult is that in general?
It's interesting because you can find yourself in situations where you've signed a contract and you're working with someone long term, but you realize that you're not quite aligned on what you see in the work. I would say this is a bit niche, but I feel like I have a very good gut feeling. And that may be just from being very perceptive and autistic. I find that I can usually tell pretty quickly, and that gut feeling is often accurate. But I would say you want to talk about it and kind of see what people say in their answers and read into it a little bit. Are they focused specifically on one thing? Are they able to support you in all the areas of your program, or are they only really talking about testing issues and automated testing? This is it's a big, complicated journey with a lot of work streams, and you need to make sure that the streams you want to move forward with suppliers, that you really trust in them, but also how they communicate with you, because that's so important. A con of external suppliers for me is having to translate the advice given in those sessions or the deliverables into the context of your organization. And you need to find suppliers that's easy to do, because that translation can take a really long time. And you've got the budget, you've spent it, you need to prove that worth. And if you're spending a lot of time when you're already just one or two people translating these deliverables into something usable, that's not the best, that's not hitting the benefits of using external suppliers, because you're not having your own capability space to drive forward other work streams. You're using it to translate the deliverables. So it's very much keeping an idea of whether it would actually give you your time back, whether it would help with your velocity, or if it's a struggle to communicate and something that you'll be spending a lot of time on. I would say.
Heather, same question. I'm just wondering how easy it is to find suppliers as well. I mean, obviously, speaking as AbilityNet 20 years ago, we were the only people doing this. I'm conscious that there's loads of it out there, loads of different people supplying things. Is that part of the challenge for you in terms of trying to work out who's going to be best for which task?
Yeah, and I think that's where our Champions of Accessibility Network group comes very handy, because we're all, I mean, for those who don't know, it's a group of people who care about accessibility. It started off as focusing really on people who were trying to set up champions networks, but it's kind of grown into really just any kind of accessibility conversation. It's amazing. And we talk a lot about other people's experiences of suppliers, how good the products or services actually are. It's really useful. And I think as soon as you can chat to someone who's maybe in a similar kind of business to yours, trying to do a similar thing, because they range, they vary so much. and you're trying to find something that will fit with your business, your culture, as Zoe's saying. So if you can find a like-minded person to talk to about their experiences, then it's really going to help you. But it's all a challenge, Mark, isn't it? But that's great that there's loads of people out there offering accessibility services. It really is good, and there's a lot of great stuff out there. It's just
Okay, so we have run out of time, unfortunately, as we knew we would. So if we could take the next slide up, that would be great. Thank you, Louise. There's a question here I'm just going to finish with, because I love what you just said then, Heather, about having people to talk to. Somebody's asking how you convince the C-suite at the beginning about the value of having a program. If I could have a penny even for being able to answer that question every time it's asked, I'd be a millionaire. It's the hardest question, is how do you get people on board? And in terms of strategy, what we've been talking about today, I think, is thinking about building that internal capability, we've called it. But actually, when you start with that champions idea, you're trying to build that groundswell, really, that could be at any level of organization, that somebody hears what you're talking about and says, oh yeah, I'm interested in that, or I have some experience or knowledge of that, or there's a reason that resonates with me. And I think you know, there are other ways of answering the question about how to convince people, like building a return on investment model and all the other bits. But I think today what I've been hearing is you need to build a program which is varied and flexible and draws people in. Charlie, your points about, you know, the learner is the answer. What are they learning? What do they want to learn? How are they learning it? Where are they getting that learning from? It's not a one size fits all. And if you start to build those relationships, then some of the stuff, Zoe, you said about, you know, making that training mandatory is because of relationships you've built internally. It isn't because somebody asked you to build a mandatory program. It's because somewhere along the way somebody said, yeah, okay, we'll make it mandatory, because you had built that relationship with them. And I think that a lot of what we've talked about in capability is the people in your organizations. We need to keep remembering that's the thing that's shifted over 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 years in your respective organizations, is more and more people get what you're talking about, have a role in it, are helping one another with it. And that's true externally as well. The Champions of Accessibility Network is fantastic for being able to pick up on somebody who's either 1 or 2 steps ahead of where you are, can give you that big picture, has heard it before, and gives you a shoulder to cry on. So really, for everybody out there, I think having your own internal network of champions is a really key part of this capability thing. It's your own internal army of change agents. We have a guide that you can download. All of these links I'm showing on the screen at the moment will be shared afterwards. We also have a maturity model, which is the framework that Heather talks about. That gives you a bigger sense of what you might be working on, even if you're only working on certain elements of it. And that's often a way of linking into the senior leadership as well, and understanding their priorities rather than just the, you know, the immediate priorities around accessibility. We do lots of training for different teams. So obviously there are different elements of what you've described that we provide that you might already have internally or not, that might fill gaps. And then we do testing and consultancy and other things that have been mentioned. And the pros and cons, as you say, we're aware of those as well when we work with clients. Sometimes we can't get inside those systems, so we're the wrong answer. So we're very, very clear about that. So if you're listening in and thinking about how you might use external suppliers and where to build the internal, you know, hopefully you've got the message that it isn't one size fits all, that it needs to be adapted and change as you go through your program. That having a program means you've realized that there's more than one thing you're going to be doing at a time. And so you may make progress in one work stream, you know, whilst the other is starting to develop. And Matthew reminded all of us to make sure that we all understand what the problem is before we get too far into it. So any one of those areas that you're looking at, do you have a clear idea about what you're trying to achieve? So thank you very much to everybody. We have a newsletter. If you aren't on our newsletter, we share lots of news through that. We have some upcoming webinars, how AI can help disabled people, next month. We are going to be coming live from the Google Accessibility Discovery Center on the 5th of June to find out more about inclusive user research. And there's a session about dementia, which will be running in July. Thank you so much, Zoe, Charlie, Heather. Already said thank you to Matthew separately. I think he set the scene in a really lovely way. But I think what, you know, your frontline stories of trying to address this within your organization. That's exactly what we needed. So a huge thank you for that. Thank you to everybody who joined us. We'll be sharing some FAQs afterwards. The recording will be available very shortly, and we'll let you know when it's there. And if you do have any questions, further questions, get in touch with us and ask us anything. Once we've published up the FAQs, if it's still not clear, please do ask us for more information. We'll share that back out into the community. So thanks everybody for coming. Sorry we overran very slightly, and we'll see you very soon. Take care.